Alright, in this video I'm going to give an introduction to Bitcoin SV. Now, the easiest way of understanding Bitcoin SV, or Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, is that it's just Bitcoin, okay? Because it follows the original protocol that's laid out in the white paper and the early writings of Satoshi. Okay, so here's the white paper, and here's the early writings of Satoshi. Now, one of the things that most people don't realize is that BTC no longer follows what's in the white paper and the early writings of Satoshi. Okay, so if this dotted line is the original protocol design, BTC has gone way off the path. Okay, they've added a bunch of things like segregated witness and the Lightning Network. Okay, and a lot of the core features and use cases for Bitcoin don't work on BTC. Okay, and we'll talk about those later. But the whole purpose for Bitcoin SV is just to go back to this original protocol. Okay, so when I say that the easiest way of understanding Bitcoin SV is that it's Bitcoin, okay, it's because it just follows this original protocol, this original definition of what Bitcoin is. Because remember, the term Bitcoin was defined in the white paper and the early writings of Satoshi. Okay, and Bitcoin SV just follows that. Now, for BTC to call themselves Bitcoin, even though they no longer follow what's in the white paper where the term Bitcoin was defined, okay, it doesn't really make sense. It's not accurate. Now, people will argue with that and they'll say, well, look, Kevin, software projects evolve and change. And you can't expect iOS 15 to be the same as iOS version 1. Okay, and they use this as a justification to say that BTC is just the new updated version. Okay, now that sounds nice, but it's wrong, okay, for a couple of reasons. The first reason it's wrong is because Bitcoin is meant to be a base layer protocol. Okay, it's meant to be like TCP. Okay, and TCP, of course, is a base layer protocol of the internet. Okay, and TCP, okay, has literally not changed in decades. Okay, because it's a foundational protocol. It's like the foundation of a house. Okay, and if you change the foundation, you break the whole house. You break all the other layers. So if TCP were to upgrade, then we'd have to update all the protocols built on top of it, like the email protocols and others, but then all the routers would have to be replaced. It'd be a total mess, okay, a total nightmare. So base layer protocols, which is what Bitcoin is meant to be, do not change, okay? It's like TCP, it has not changed in decades. And especially when we're talking about a protocol that has to do with money, okay, it's even more important that it's set in stone because people contracted money, okay? And if you change the money, then you break all these contracts. So it's super important. Bitcoin is set in stone. And this was mentioned in the early writings of Satoshi. So to say that BTC is just the new evolved version, that doesn't make sense either, okay? Because this isn't like an app where you get a new version every year, or a mobile operating system where they give you new features once a year. It's not like that, okay? This is like TCP. It's set in stone. So that's the first reason it doesn't make sense to call BTC just the updated version. The second reason is that all the core features of Bitcoin, okay, don't work on BTC. Okay, literally, the primary use cases for Bitcoin do not work. Okay, and we'll get into what these are. So, the first primary use case for Bitcoin is the ability to do micropayments. Okay, and this works on Bitcoin SV, but it does not work on BTC. So if you read the white paper, on the first page it talks about how with the current infrastructure, it's impossible to do these small casual payments. Okay, it's just too expensive. And then it lays out the solution to a new infrastructure where we could do these small casual payments on the web. Okay, in other words, micropayments. Now, this is super exciting for a ton of different reasons. Okay, one of the big use cases for this is that we can start moving away from the ad-based business models on the internet. okay, which is very exciting to me. Okay, we've all heard this idea that if you are not paying for the product, you are the product. Okay, and this is the problem right now with the current ad-based business models of the internet. Okay, they gather all this data about us and they basically sell us for our behaviors, okay, to the highest bidder. So what we want to do instead is be the end customer. Okay, we don't want to be the product, but we want to be the customer of these services. Well, the thing about that that's tricky is that most of these web services aren't worth that much. Like, how much would you be willing to pay for a Google search? Okay, just an individual Google search is what I mean. Okay, maybe 1/10 of a cent. Okay, or how much would you be willing to look at somebody's page on a social media site? I don't know, maybe a fraction of a cent. So if we were going to pay directly to use these services, we would need a payment system that could do things for a fraction of a cent. Okay, and that doesn't work with credit cards, okay, because the normal sort of credit card transaction fee for the merchants is around 2% plus 10 cents. Okay, so anything less than 10 cents obviously doesn't make sense because you don't want to pay, 100% transaction fee. Okay, but realistically, anything less than $1 doesn't make much sense because you're still giving up more than 10% of your revenue to the payment processor. Okay, and so what we need is something that is much, much, much cheaper, okay, that can do these small casual payments. And this is what Bitcoin allows us to do. So Bitcoin can do a payment for a fraction of a cent, okay? And so this allows us to do things like pay 1/10 of a cent for a Google search. And this is just not possible using credit cards, okay? So this enables all sorts of new business models on the internet where we can start being the end customer, okay, instead of being the product. Now, beyond just changing internet business models, it also opens up a possibility for a bunch of new type of things, okay? Like, for example, if you wanted to connect to a public Wi-Fi, well, instead of paying for a day or whatever, you could actually potentially pay for the data used, right? You pay per packet of data, okay? And this has a lot of benefits. Recently, I was in this hotel in Africa where they had really low bandwidth internet, okay? And everybody at the hotel would try and use the computer at the same time in the evening and it would crash it for everybody, okay? So nobody had access. But you could imagine that if we're paying per packet, you could have like surge pricing, okay? Where if it's super busy, then they could, raise the price and then at least somebody would be able to connect to the internet. Okay, but right now, since there's no way of pricing this stuff, it just doesn't work for anybody. Okay, even in the United States, sometimes when I'm in traffic, okay, and there's everybody else is in traffic too, and everybody's trying to look at their phone, and the internet doesn't work for anybody, okay, because there's too many people trying to access the same cell tower. Okay, but if we had things like pay per packet internet, then we could have this dynamic pricing and at least somebody could access the internet if it was super important that they do. Okay, they just have to pay more. But this is what money is for. Money is for allocating scarce resource in an orderly way. Okay, so micropayments, super, super helpful. Okay, so not only for ad-based, getting rid of the ad-based business model of the internet, but things like accessing the internet by paying per packet, or even things like the parking meters. Okay, it sounds kind of silly, but in my town, they recently started giving us the ability to pay for the parking meters with a card. But the problem is that, normally you just want to pop in like a 25-cent thing to pay for 20 minutes. But when you swipe your card, it immediately charges you $3 and gives you a 2-hour limit. Okay, well, that's not what I wanted. I just want to be there for 20 minutes. Okay, but the reason they do that is because, again, it's too expensive to do small payments. So they have to charge you the $3, okay, instead of just the 25 cents or whatever. But with the ability to do micropayments, we can do that kind of thing where you pay for small payments. Okay, so this is perhaps the most important and primary use case for Bitcoin, micropayments, and it doesn't work on BTC. Okay, it works on BSV, but on BTC, the average transaction fee as of today is like $2 to $3. Okay, and so it's actually more expensive than credit cards in most cases. Okay, and so it just doesn't make any sense. So this is why BSV is Bitcoin. BTC is something else. Okay, now the second primary use case that I want to talk about here is the ability to do programmable money, okay, or smart contracts. I prefer the word programmable money because I think it's a little bit clearer, but the term smart contracts is popular. Okay, so this feature was actually built into Bitcoin from day one, okay? But these opcodes that make it possible were disabled, okay? So funny story, but Vitalik Buterin, when he went to create Ethereum, he was first looking at this Bitcoin project called Mastercoin, which was trying to use the opcodes that were left to do some of these sort of programmable money features on top of Bitcoin. Okay, now at the time, none of the developers wanted to re-enable these opcodes. And so instead of Vitalik building Ethereum on top of Bitcoin, he was forced to create his own blockchain. Okay, so Ethereum should have never needed to exist. It should have just all been done on Bitcoin. Okay, but because these opcodes were disabled, it forced him to build his own blockchain. Well, BSV follows the original protocol, and it has re-enabled all of these opcodes that were disabled. Okay, so all the things that you see on Ethereum, like the NFTs, okay, or even the fungible tokens, like, tokens that people want to build, or central bank digital currencies, all of that kind of stuff, okay, is possible on Bitcoin SV. But even better, since we can do, micropayments, you could actually do these things for inexpensive items, not just these super expensive pieces of art that, you have to pay $20 to transfer because there's so much congestion on the network and the fees are so high. But instead, what if you want to, buy a subway ticket NFT, okay, or a bus ticket or a movie ticket? So because we could do micropayments on BSV, that's the kind of thing that you could do as NFTs, right? Okay, it allows for all this type of stuff, stock certificates, car titles, stuff like this, okay? So Bitcoin SV can do all of this stuff at a much, much cheaper price than Ethereum. So NFTs, fungible tokens, smart contracts, okay, it's all possible. And people used to say that Bitcoin script was just too complicated to do these things. Okay, well, now there's a company called Script that has built this higher level language that's human readable that then compiles into Bitcoin script. Okay, and so Bitcoin script was never meant to be where you write the program. Okay, it's more like that's like the assembly language, but rather we were supposed to design languages that were human readable that then compiled into Bitcoin script. Okay, and so there's a company called Script that has done that. Okay, and so it's super easy to do this programmable money smart contract stuff. All right, so that's the second primary feature of Bitcoin that, again, was in there from day one. It was just disabled. So Ethereum should have never existed. Okay, and of course, this is only possible on BSV, doesn't work on BTC. Now, the third primary use case is the ability to do what I'm going to call improved record keeping. Okay, and this is super useful for things like cybersecurity and also just reducing fraud. So let's start with the cybersecurity example. So one of the things that hackers will often do is when they get into a database, they'll do a bunch of changes and then they'll erase their change logs, right? They'll cover their tracks basically. Well, with Bitcoin, since we can write to this immutable, ledger, and we can do it for only a fraction of a cent, you could have, potentially the administrator changes could be written to the blockchain, okay, in an immutable way. And it's going to use a bunch of some of these opcodes that were disabled, but they work on BSV, like op push data, etc. But you could have these changes be written to the blockchain in an immutable way. And so the hacker that gets in there and changes a bunch of things, well, he can't erase his tracks. Okay, he can't delete the logs. They're immutable. So it's stuff like this where it helps us do record keeping in a better way. Okay, we can also publish, the hash of a certain data, and so you can prove that a file existed at a certain point in time, or that a database was in a certain state at a certain point in time. Okay, this is super useful for all sorts of stuff. Okay, as far as reducing fraud, there's a way to prove that there's only one set of books. So things like the Madoff Ponzi wouldn't be possible in a world of Bitcoin, right? Because he had multiple sets of books. Okay, one that he kept to himself of what the actual, finances were, but then one that he showed to the auditors and one that he showed to potential investors. So with Bitcoin, you can show that there's only one set of books, okay? And so it could help reduce fraud. So this is what Bitcoin is about, right? The primary feature, of course, is the micropayments, but it also has these other added benefits, okay, and these other features that we can use it for. And of course, none of these work on BTC. Okay, they work just if we follow the original protocol that was laid out in the white paper and the early writings of Satoshi. Okay, and that's what BSV re-enables. Okay, it re-enables that early protocol. Now, if you look on the internet, you just search for error code 402, okay, it'll be an error code that says payment required. It's kind of like when you go to use a server and it says can't connect to server and you get an error code. Well, this one says payment required. And the early, creators of the internet had this idea that there'd be payments on the web somehow. Okay, there just wasn't the implementation. And in many ways, Bitcoin is that implementation. Okay, we now have a way to do micropayments and we can pay for services over the web. Okay, that's really the primary use case of Bitcoin that I see, and it doesn't work on BTC, okay, but it does on Bitcoin SV. So again, Bitcoin SV is just Bitcoin. It follows the original protocol laid out in the white paper and the early writings of Satoshi. And there's a lot to talk about, but I will not go into it anymore. I'll just leave it at that, and that'll be a good introduction. All right, so thank you for watching, and I'll see you in another one.